Welcome everybody to a Hyoh AI test. We're doing the should you pull the whole shebang. So here we go. We're going to be looking at his AI, and the first thing he's going to use is going to be his AoE buff. So this is the buff that gives defense penetration to himself and to allies. It activates his new counter. It gives him a 40% attack buff. It's really very strong. The only downside to it is that it can be dispelled. Now I've also put bells on him, and we can see that his second action here is to use bells. So if you are going to run him with a high AP build, that is the order he'll use it in. He won't use courage. Let's take a look at his buff order again. And now in this video, I accidentally hit auto. So he already used his team buff that gives the defense penetration. We'll see what he chooses to do next. So revitalize. And then this is just to see kind of like what the final order will be. I put him so far away from any units that he is going to go ahead and he's now going to use Veiled Defiance. This is the courage / tech up accuracy buff, and he's still not going to actually reach the enemy. So then he uses Sharp Spear from his Lancer sub, which is an interesting buff, because it gives a lot of crit rate. Okay, so when we put it all together, it means he's going to use Beast's Roar first. He uses Bell second, Veiled Defiance third, and then Sharp Spear fourth. That is the priority. However, other TMRs might actually go in a lower priority. I've noticed that. It really depends. You have to do the testing with it, but it's likely that a lot of players might use bells with him. So that is an important thing that we can check right now. All right, so let's get to the rest of the should you pull. And there's one big caveat I want to talk about at the very beginning, and that is that Hyoh is not limited. It means that you can off banner him after his event ends. For the rest of the time, he's going to be on all the other banners going forward. It means that he gets shards from his character quest, and he has a hard quest, which you can farm daily. This opens the possibility of you not pulling him and then getting him later, or getting on a select ticket or something like that, or maybe pulling him now but doing a slow build, because you can do it more efficiently than a limited unit because you have access to that hard quest. So definitely something to consider. So let's talk about who is Hyoh going to be strong and weak against. And really he's very specifically built to do a lot of damage and protect quite nicely against ice and missile damage. However, that doesn't mean he's going to be good against all missile damage, because specifically there are missile units with a ton of penetration, and he doesn't have really a lot of protection against single target attacks. But with ice, he has a lot of ice resistance. He can go to very high levels if you specifically want to build that, and that is where he can really shine. He's also going to be very strong against a lot of units that have high slash attack resistance, but not necessarily tanks, and that's because of his lack of defense penetration. Although again, that can be mitigated, especially for an experienced fire player that has a lot of different cards at their disposal. Still, I would watch out for anybody with a dispel, because they're going to be able to strip a lot of his buffs, and also just high defense opponents in general are going to be a problem for him. And most importantly, evasion is going to be tricky. He can be built for like accuracy, but just to give you a rough idea of where he's at, he is essentially right with Satya in terms of accuracy. So he's not on the accurate side of things, but he can be built accurate at a cost of being less bulky. Let's talk some pros and cons. We'll start with the pros. For damage, he should be a pretty high damage dealer, especially when he's coming up again against people that don't have a lot of defense, because he can easily reach 100% slashers as pen a lot of different ways. He gets 40% from 2 different passives, so that's 80%, and then you can give him 20 to 30 depending if you give him the Glacial Greatsword, or maybe you give him Esther's Greatsword. But then he also has a limit burst that gives him 40% more slashers as penetration. So it's pretty simple for him to be right up there if you really want him to be. He's got a barrier break, which is absolutely essential right now. He's got a very high attack stat. He's got lots of slash attack on his kit, and then he buffs both of them with active buffs. So he really will be hidden for quite a bit. He also has one of those choose 2 targets for a single target attack. That's really important, because again, there's these units that have very high, AoE resistance like Hyoh, but if you can hit them with a single target attack, that's very effective. And so for him to have that, it's a really good thing to have. Also, his AoE defense break is pretty nice as well, because it has a bunch of different debuffs on it. But to be able to just hit a wide range of enemies, do a 25 defense break to all of them, that's going to be like, especially when it comes up against those people with not a lot of bulk built onto them, not a lot of defense, he's really going to strip people down and enable the whole team to be able to go in and seriously just whomp some people. He also has some decent utility. The biggest thing that he has is that he gives people and himself 40% defense penetration, which is really, really huge. It can be dispelled, but it's still quite the buff. He also has the healing power down and counter chance down, and that's all on the same big AoE that his defense breaks on. So when he hits with that, it's a big deal. It does a lot of things that will seriously help in this meta. It's going to help with Sephiroth not being healed by Lemures, but also he's not going to be attacked with the 100% counter, or 80% counter. Yeah, for me it's 100% that Sephiroth has. He even has AP recovery on his kill. That's locked behind Transcendence though, and then a very large potency 100% hit on the Vacuum Slash for Lancer sub job. So there is a 100% hit. It doesn't work against Yuffie. It does work against everybody else. He can even dispel haste and re-raise on the same skill, so that's very, very useful as well, and actually something that Fire needs if you're not running Satya and you're taking on a lot of dark teams right now. A lot of them are running re-raise, so that's very handy. And then finally, his survivability. So he's got a 2-use courage, and he has 25 to 37 innate AoE resistance, but obviously you can supplement that quite easily. For example, he's an armor wearer, so he can actually wear the Brigandine UR equipment to get 10 more AoE resistance. You can get 20 from a card. So like there's a bunch of ways to do it, but you can essentially stack a pretty insane amount of AoE resistance. Now, if you're running him with a tank that's going to be drawing hates, that's going to put him in a very, very good spot. If you run him in a solo, in a team that does not have a tank though, you'll be in trouble, because if somebody decides to hit him with a single target attack, that is going to do a lot of damage. He's also got a skill, a counter that activates after he uses his Beast's Roar ability, and it activates a new counter for him. It's a 50% counter chance to heal 30%, and then if you give him healing power up, and he does have some on his kit on the Knight sub job, then you could actually heal more. So if you're in this scenario where he's not quite dying to things, and then he gets to counter and heal back up again, it's a really good spot to be in. It's just, again, it's going to happen from those AoE attacks and not from the single target attacks. There are some cons, however. There's quite a few, I guess, in my eyes, but before that, you made it already to the cons. So how about a pro? By giving a thumbs up on the video, liking it, subscribing, all that kind of stuff. And then we'll hit the cons. The first one being no innate defense penetration. That's a loss right there. Now, we can mitigate that. So if you put on the Dark Ifrit VC, you get 25% for the party. You put on this Sorrow VC specifically on Hyoh, that's 20% bestowed. So all of a sudden he's at 45%, which is actually above what most units usually come in at innately. So he can get to that innate spot using these vision cards. However, that's not accessible to everybody. Some people might not have pulled on the Sorrow card, or maybe they just missed the collab. Maybe they don't want to pull for Dark Espers because it is very risky. You could spend a lot of Visior. All of a sudden he has no innate defense penetration. He gets 40% from his active buff, but then that can be stripped with any sort of dispel. You might think, okay, well, I'll add it on a weapon. However, you don't have a great sword that actually gives that. So then you have to look at other things. We do have quite a few accessories and things that you could put on him that give him some defense penetration. You could use Trust Stones, but basically, if you're not set up to use this very specific VC build, then he could have some issues with defense penetration. And even if you, luckily, you're not really getting hamstrung having to use those VCs because they're so good already, but it does mean you can't play around. Like if you wanted to try another VC, you can't really do that because then you're taking away his defense penetration. Also, as I've already mentioned, AoE resistance is really his only source of bulk. He's got no defense, no spirit. He doesn't have single target resistance, and he doesn't have a super high amount of HP. It's not low, but it's also not in the kind of like bulky bruiser status kind of range. So he is going to die to a lot of attacks quite easily, especially pierce attacks and especially single target attacks. And then finally, he's got low agility and he's got middling accuracy, as I described. It's around Satya's accuracy score. The agility could be supplemented by a passive that he has. The downside to that is that if you're picking that, it means you're not picking the other slash resist pen. It means you're not picking the AoE resistance, or maybe if you're going for like a crit build, that you're not picking the Lancer sub. So like really it's not a given that you're going to use the agility passive. So, you know, it's a kind of a bummer to see that his agility is only at 63. You know, he's only got the 3-in-1 movement, 3 for jump. And that's also, you know, that's all going to kind of equate to him, you know, getting caught out sometimes. All right. So some little closing thoughts here. His weapon, the Ultima Bringer. I mean, it's interesting, and it's got all this ice killer. If you're going after ice units, it's certainly great. The initial 10 AP is really what's saving it here, because otherwise it's not that great of a sword just compared to what we already have. There's nothing that special about it. The initial AP is very big though, so that is a big deal. I would have rather it had defense penetration, but still, you know, we're going to equip it. I recommend building an assault. I did kind of think about building a crit one. He doesn't have any innate crit rate, but if you give him this and you give him an Alex ring and, you know, you build the Lancer sub for crit, maybe you could do something cool. Or maybe you give him the Thornlet and he crits and does the agility down, but he's also getting 20 defense penetration there. So like there's some options, but overall I would actually recommend that most people just build an assault for him. I think that's the safest thing to do. We can also talk about his vision card. It's very interesting. So this is actually pretty solid. It's got 3 agility on it. It's got 10 defense penetration. So it is a substitute for the Sorrow card. You know, for those of you that want to use it, but you don't have the Sorrow card, then you can use this to get 10 instead of 20 defense penetration. But then for Hyoh specifically, it gives him more accuracy, which he needs, and it gives him more acquired AP up, which he needs. You also can get, on the party ability, 18% accuracy, 20 crit rates. And again, we're talking about that crit build, and then 20% magic resistance. So it's a really solid card. And where it can really shine is if you use this with Sorrow and King Mont and Hyoh, you can build a mono fire party that can access this. And in limited, you can also access Naya. And there's other, you know, elements that can use this as well. But really, when we're talking about Hyoh, it's a very solid card for him. If you want to be building him for a great sword party, then this is certainly going to be a very important card for him, and I would definitely be pulling for it. I myself pulled for Hyoh and his card. I really like the card. I think that it could be skipped because, again, same deal. It's in the regular pool. You can get it later on, no problem. It will come eventually, or you can get it with a select ticket. So unless you're specifically going to build greatswords, or you're specifically going to be working on Hyoh, and even then he'll be just fine with the fire VCs. Like, this is really for a new player going into fire. They might want this, but if you have the fire VCs, you really don't need this. So like, it's a very specific group of people that will want this vision card, but obviously it's a very strong vision card because it has 18% agility, and we always love to see that. I also wanted to talk about his TMR because it's pretty cool. It's got a very nice team buff and a good range, and 2 casts as well. It has 20% fire resist, and then 20% ice resist, and 20 defense. So he needs all of those things. Those are all great. The downside is he has a lot of buffs to cast. So maybe you're casting, you have to cast the Beast Roar, right? You have to get that defense penetration. You want the Courage, and maybe you want Bells, but if you want this instead, it's a lot of stuff to cast. It's not impossible. Maybe you can put this on somebody else. Unfortunately, it is actually a helm, so not a lot of people can equip it. I'm actually very interested in trying this out on some other people, so I'm very excited. Elemental resistance is very nice to have for certain matchups. I think taking on Fire Evade with some fire resistance might be kind of neat as a fire mirror match. Maybe you build some accuracy as well. I don't know. There's some cool applications with it. It's not a must grab TMR, but you know, it's certainly fun to play with. And then you might be asking yourself, do you have to transcend him? Can I leave him at 120? And he kind of looks like it might be okay, but I actually think it's pretty big deal to go to transcension because the extra AoE resistance is always good, but the AP recovery being added onto the Unknown Trader is very important. So if he kills 1 person with Unknown Trader, he gets 15 AP back. If he kills 2 people, he gets 30 AP back. That is actually a big deal. I think it's going to be a key part of a non-Bells build for him. So if you want to do that, then yeah, you're going to need to transcend him. I'll definitely be transcending him myself. Most of the new units are just going to be an automatic yeah. If you're planning on pulling them and using them, then yeah, you should be transcending them. So just something to keep in mind. I saw a lot of people online at the beginning of the day on Reddit saying things like, he's a 70 cost, he's an 80 cost. And honestly, I don't know what those people are smoking, because obviously he's not a 70 cost or an 80 cost. He has way too much happening on his kit. Like, that's just an insane take in my opinion. However, I do agree that he's probably actually closer to a 90 cost in my eyes. I don't think that he's worthy of the 100 cost status. I do think that Hyoh is a good unit with a ton of utility and a ton of relevant things like the healing power down, defense break, and counter chance. Like, that is a really powerful skill. There's a lot of good things going on, and I think that if you were building fire, you might want him, but even then you might want to wait. But if you're like new to fire, maybe you just started at the anniversary, you pulled Yuffie, then yeah, you probably want to pull him and then go dip into fire. Or maybe you're looking for the greatsword parties, then again, he might be somebody for you, and you might be a diehard fire main. But otherwise, like, a lot of people should probably wait, and there's lots of good reasons for this. We've got Full Metal Alchemist coming up, we've got more limited and more 100 cost units coming up, and lots of good dark VCs and espers, etc. So really, is he going to be so huge that he's needed right now? I don't think so, especially for people playing Fire Evade, because he doesn't really fit into that team necessarily, although I'm certainly going to try messing around with him too. But really, I don't think that he's going to be a great investment right away for a lot of players. So I think you need to ask him if you're going to use him more than the rest of the teams that you're using right now. And, you know, maybe you're really concerned about countering ice in your meta and you don't have the other fire cast to do that, then that's a really good reason to pull him. But otherwise, I think most people are going to be in a spot where you can wait for him, and that's okay. All right, that's going to be it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Hope it was useful for you. And you know, it's tough for me personally not to recommend a fire unit. It's just there's so much coming on right now that it's just really difficult. You have to really know that you want this unit to pull for it. But don't worry, because you can live vicariously through me and all of my Hyoh videos that I'll put out. And then if it turns out that he is, a little bit better than I was expecting, then I'm so sorry. But I'm sure I'm going to make it look that way as much as I can. But otherwise, let me know what your plans are, what you plan to do. And, if you've pulled for Hyoh already, how are you liking them so far? And I'll be getting out some Hyoh content as soon as I'm able. Otherwise, I'll catch you all in the next video.